Hello, my name is Talia Clark with WMCT-tv. We'll help you get to know each of the 10 Democratic candidates running for Massachusetts' 3rd Congressional District seat by welcoming them into our studio for one-on-one interviews. Our first guest and first name to appear on the ballot is Jeff Ballinger. Hello, Jeff. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm from Andover and married to an immigrant from a majority Muslim country, so we may not even have met in Donald Trump's America, but very happily married and two fine boys in grad school.
Why did you decide to run for Congress?
Well, it's mainly because I've been disturbed by the direction of the Democratic Party for the last 25, 30 years, really. It's with the decline of unions, they've depended more and more on corporate fundraising, and if they're raising money from the same banks and insurance companies and Wall Street firms, they can't differentiate themselves from the Republicans. You know, I remember the party when it was more activist-based and they depended on communities to get out the vote, and now it seems to be more a corporate thing. You know, they raise lots of money and they do lots of advertising, and their connection with the people has really been lost, I think.
What issues do you plan to tackle if you're elected into Congress?
I plan to be that vocal person who's standing up for, you know, a government that's not very popular with the American people right now. Stop this. This is what's been happening in the last 30 years in America. The 20% has been going up and the 80% has been going down, and the wealth gap is increasing, mainly because, you know, unions, it's been very difficult to organize union and getting worse every year.
What are some new ideas you plan to bring to Congress if you're elected?
The National Labor Relations Board used to have a division of economic research. And I think we really have to know, for the young people coming up and for businesses and for unions, where the jobs are going to be in 5 years and 10 years and 20 years out. Because if we can't plan for the training, if we can't plan for, you know, the economy that's evolving, we're not going to be competitive, and I think we ought to be reshoring jobs. We ought to be bringing jobs back to America. Another thing I would get after in Congress is that we not all developed countries allow, you know, unrestricted marketing to children. You know, I really think this is a problem because you have, you know, poor families that are under such pressure on a lot of fronts, but then their children want the things that they see advertised so heavily, and you know, I really think it's you know, gets back to my corporate crime database.
What sets you apart from other Democratic candidates? I
think the campaign finance issue is one of them. I don't hear any of the other candidates, and there are 10 others, you know, speaking so forcefully about the corrupting influence of money in politics. So I think that sets me apart. I think my international experience definitely sets me apart. I mean, I've seen how the global economy works, and whether we like it or not, we're in, you know, a global competition, and I see, you know, that some of our companies are acting very responsibly, but a lot of them are doing terrible things, not only here but abroad, and we have to change the way, you know, the system treats businesses, and I think we really have to plan for, and I'm the only one, I think, talking about planning for the future economy.
Is there anything you want voters to know about you before the primary election in September?
I'm just happy to have a chance to talk with the people of the 3rd District, and we're running a very frugal campaign, as I said, so we could use volunteers if they would visit ballingerforcongress.com. That's BALLINGER Congress.com. You can volunteer, maybe donate a few bucks, and help bring this district back into control of the people and not so much in the pockets of big business.
Thank you for your time, Jeff. Now it's time to welcome our next guest, Alexandra Chandler. Thank you for joining us, Alexandra. How are you?
Very well.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Alexandra Chandler, and I'm one of the candidates for Congress for the 3rd Congressional District with Nikki Tsongas retiring. I live in Haverhill. I live there with my 2 kids, my 2 sons, William and George, and my wife, Kathy. My parents also live in Haverhill. And I am someone who is a first-time candidate for office.
What made you decide to run for Congress in the first place?
Because I humbly believe that I am the best to actually get things done for working class and middle class people. And the reason is, my intelligence community career, I joined the community after the 9/11 attacks in New York City. I was there with my wife, Kathy, who is then my girlfriend, and during the attack, she was under Lower Manhattan. When the towers came down, I spent a few hours not knowing if she had made it, and it was one of those moments where your life changes. I told myself that if she came back home to me, if she came back safe, I would dedicate my life to service in some capacity. So when she did come back safe, she called me from a payphone, and it was 3 hours later, I decided that life had changed. And I applied to agencies in the intelligence community, joined the intelligence community, spent 13 years working on issues like weapons of mass destruction proliferations, that's stopping countries like North Korea from exporting missile and nuclear technology, supporting diplomacy that led to the Iran deal, stopping weapons from going to places like Syria, Yemen. And the reason why this is a qualification for Congress and propelled me to decide to run when Nikki Tsongas announced her retirement is that I had to work on these incredibly difficult problems under the Bush administration, Obama administration, and Trump administration. I had to work with people of all backgrounds across the United States. I had to work across government with different departments of the government. I had to work with Congress, with members from both parties.
What are a few issues you plan to tackle if you're elected into Congress?
For me, it really is about that experience as a middle-class person. So what I would say is raising wages, raising wages. Every full-time job in this country should be a living wage job. We are a wealthy country. There's no reason it should be otherwise. Combating climate change on this hot day here in Marlborough, and with a lot of hot days behind and ahead of us. I have 2 kids. They're 6 and 2 years old. They may yet see the 22nd century, and I want them to live on a planet which is livable. And we need to make the decisions now to ensure that that happens. And I'm someone from the national security realm. I can make the case that this is also a national security issue, which simultaneously I can do when we're talking about immigration, where we have this spectacle of this administration separating children from families, now indefinitely detaining families, violating international law and legal rights to asylum. I am someone who can make an effective national security case saying, this is not enhancing our national security, it's actually hurting our national security while violating our deepest held values and international law. So in a field where I think a lot of people would agree on that, I'm one who can be uniquely effective in rolling it back.
Do you have any new ideas you plan to bring to Congress if you're elected?
Having Medicare negotiate the price of prescription drugs, not having prescription drugs advertised on television. Almost no other country allows this. Expanding a buy-in option to Medicare. These are things you do along the way. And addiction is near and dear to me because of my father's struggle, and it led to his death when I was 17, the opioid epidemic. And because I have experience in community health care, I understand that this is a public health emergency, and we need to deal with it very similarly to how we dealt with HIV/AIDS in the 80s and 90s, where you integrate your services so that you go into centers and into organizations where you make treatment, both the short-term intake into treatment and then over the longer term, easier than continuing to succumb to the disease of addiction. You take on some innovative programs that can get a lot of flack. I mean, we're talking about needle exchange programs, we're talking about supervised injection sites, and we need changes in federal law to be able to do that. And I'm someone that can bring the experience on the ground working with these issues and a personal passion for it.
What sets you apart from other Democratic candidates running for Congress?
I'm someone who is a middle-class person, a mom of 2. I'm also a lesbian, married to a woman. I'm also transgender. And in this moment, I think we need a Congress that represents not just the wealthy through the ultra-wealthy and the very connected, but people that have an understanding of what it's like to struggle. Because I had a dad who was between jobs growing up. He struggled with addiction. I now have the daycare costs, the student loans, the squeeze of the generations. My parents are frankly not getting any younger. And I think that we could have a Congress that actually understands those issues in a visceral sense.
Is there anything you want the people of Marlborough to know about you going into the primaries?
If people want to learn more about my candidacy, you can check out our website at alexandrachandler.com. You can sign up to volunteer. We need more people to knock on doors. You can donate to our campaign, and you can see my platform in detail that I wrote myself, points on every issue, and please give me your feedback on it, because this campaign is about you. It is about your challenges, your hopes and dreams that I want to take with me to Congress.
Thank you, Alexandra. Now it's time for our next guest, Beej Das. Beej, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Beej Das. I'm running for the 3rd Congressional District. I am, I think, one of the most interesting candidates in the race. I think most people think that, but one of the reasons I think that is I am from the district. I've spent years doing work in and around the district, including in Marlborough in my youth. I work for Fidelity Investments here. But I'm a constitutional lawyer. I'm a technology innovator in my youth, and now I own a small business right here in the 3rd District in Tingsboro. And so I bring, I think, a pretty interesting set of tools at my disposal, hopefully to be the next congressperson for this district.
Why did you decide to run for Congress?
I was thinking about, do I leave a comfortable job that the company that I created with all the employees that I care about? I thought long and hard, and I said, can you do something that's meaningful for this community? And I fundamentally believe I can, not only for this community, but for the country. My politics are somewhat different than the rest of the field. I come at it from a business person's perspective who's also a constitutional lawyer. So things like individual rights and immigration and the Constitution and its value are very important to me. But I also look at it from a businessman's perspective and say, look, I run a small business. I've got 75 employees right here in the district. Some of them are just making ends meet. And we have a system that's stacked against my friends, my employees. That's not fair, and who's going to speak for them? And so as I started thinking about all of these things and I looked at the dysfunction in Washington, I said, wow, there's a real opportunity here for somebody with a fresh perspective, someone who cares about individual values and rights, but also cares about making sure that government is working for all of us and not just the wealthy, not just special interests.
What are a few of the issues you plan to tackle if you're elected into Congress?
We have a country that has, we're chock full of issues to deal with. For me, healthcare is a big piece of the puzzle. Healthcare for a couple of things. One, if you're young and healthy and you're making, whether it's minimum wage or near that, you can't afford the monthly premiums that come out of your paycheck. I look at terrorism and cancer the same way, right? The government provides defense against one, but forces you to pay by the paycheck for the other. That doesn't make sense to me, because they'll both kill you. A terrorist will kill you, so will cancer. So why aren't we looking at it more holistically and saying, look, there are certain things that are considered important for the common defense. I think healthcare is one of them. And then climate change, that's a big one. When I bought the company that when I started the company that I started and bought the hotels that we transform, we cut the carbon footprint of each of the buildings that we buy. Why do you do that? Because long-term sustainability is critical, and we've got to be more cognizant of our environment, because if we're not, climate change will get our Earth before we can save it.
What new ideas would you bring to Congress if you were elected?
It doesn't feel like Congress is accessible to us anymore. It's because if you look at the way you have to run for office and the amount of money you have to spend, the people who get there most likely are already speaking for other people who finance them to be there, right? That means that you and I don't get the access we deserve, and I think we need to change that. If you raise money from, big city mayors or, big city bankers, you're going to listen to them. When they call, you're going to say, hey, that's a priority call. We don't have those people in our group of financiers, right? The people who are donating to us are donating to us on a basis of, he's an interesting, different individual who can bring open access to Washington.
What sets you apart from other Democratic candidates?
So I'm an Indian American, right? I'd be the first Indian American elected from Maine to Florida if we're so fortunate to get there. If you look at the Indian Americans in this district, there are between 8,000 and 11,000 of them, okay? if you apply a filter of who has voted in one of the last two primaries, 37 of them. Now, assume for a second there's some errors and it could be 57, 87, whatever that number is. That's often because they don't necessarily see someone like them who's going to represent them. And I'm obviously not running as the Indian American candidate because there are so many more other non-Indian Americans that need representation. But fundamentally, I'm hopeful that I can bring a new class of voters to understand and realize that these local, smaller, primary type elections do matter, and they will influence what happens not only at the local level but at the national level.
Is there anything you want the people of Marlborough to know about you?
I'm approachable. I've been working towards the better interest of this district for nearly all my life.
Thank you, Beach. Now it's time for our next guest, U.S. Ambassador Rufus Gifford. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Could you start by telling me a little bit about yourself?
My name is Rufus Gifford. I'm running for Congress as a Democrat in the 3rd Congressional District of Massachusetts. Most recently, I was the U.S. Ambassador to Denmark, and I worked for President Obama for 10 years. So I met him in January 2007 and worked for him for every minute of the first campaign and then the entire 10 years of his presidency.
Can you tell me how campaigning with the former president has influenced your campaign?
Over the course of the 10 years working with Obama, the number of people you meet is just fantastic. And I worked very closely with him and his entire team. And so when I think about the way we built our campaign, both the 08 and the 12 campaigns were really driven by the grassroots, really what we call bottom up, meaning really run by our volunteers. That was the engine of our campaign. And we're trying to run this campaign in the same way. It's got to be about the people. It's got to be about the grassroots. It's got to be about knocking on doors, making phone calls, talking to your neighbors. And we have an army of volunteers that is doing it alongside with me.
What are some of the issues you plan to tackle in Congress?
The first thing is something very big and broad and overarching. I desperately think that we need to instill trust back into the American system. People have lost faith and trust in government, in institutions, and in politicians. And for us to try to provide a big and a bold and an aspirational agenda, we've got to make people believe in the system first, very first. And so that's what this campaign is about. It's got to be about building trust one person at a time, one conversation at a time. So there's that. The second thing is, I feel like we can't just simply Trump bash all day long. That our party, the Democratic Party, and I know it's hard when we see kids and their parents being ripped apart on TV right now. It breaks my heart. Absolutely breaks my heart. And it's hard not to rage against the administration. But this is what I say to that. Yes, let's rage internally at the administration. But as the party, as our campaign, let's present an agenda that is big, that is bold, and that is optimistic. Let's talk about this issue, and let's talk about about how to fix it, not just be anti-Trump. Let's come up with constructive and positive solutions. And that's where I think we need to send our country. Not just what we are against, it is also what we are for.
What new ideas do you plan to bring to Congress if you're elected?
This is something I worked on very closely as ambassador because I was the U.S. ambassador to Denmark. Denmark is 40% renewable, meaning 40% of the energy that they produce is green. I woke up every morning for 4 years and looked out at offshore wind turbines. Think about the kinds of jobs that we can create if we can produce a real green energy economy in Massachusetts. These are new jobs. These should be union jobs, advanced manufacturing jobs. We need to invest in retraining and apprenticeships and get young people excited about this.
What sets you apart from other candidates?
I'm the only candidate in the race that has any national level political experience. I'm also the only candidate in the race that has the high level international experience.
Is there anything you want the people of Marlborough to know about you going into the primary election?
I want the people of Marlborough to know that in me they will have a firm and staunch advocate, someone who goes to work every single day and knows that they are fighting for the people of Marlborough.
Thank you for speaking with us, Rufus. Now it's time to welcome our next guest, Leonard Golder. Leonard, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
My name's Len Golder. I live in Stowe. I've lived there now for almost 28 years, raised my family there. I have a 31-year-old son now and a daughter-in-law and a 6-month-old grandson. They live in Memphis. And I'm an attorney. I used to work as an administrator for the state of Massachusetts. I'm also a former social worker. And I've been involved now in local government for just about 28 years as an elected official.
Do you think this experience in local government will help you in Congress?
Certainly would help me in Congress, and I would hope it would help me in this race because, you know, when you're in local government, you're really, it's really where the rubber meets the road. You know, you're dealing with issues that are very close to people's heart and soul. And every issue that I've dealt with on the local level translates to an issue or a problem on the national level.
What made you want to run for Congress?
Well, you know, I'm dealing with all these issues on the local level. I see what's going on nationally. And what I see nationally is so, to me, so reminiscent of what was going on in our country back in the 1960s and 1970s. We had a president whose integrity was under question. We had a president whose governing style was very divisive. It was creating a polarization in Congress and in the general public. And I see what's going on now, and as Yogi Berra once said, to me it looks like deja vu all over again. So that's motivating me to want to step up, serve in Congress, and serve in a way to get things done. You know, with my experience, I've learned there are times when you have to compromise and get half a loaf as opposed to getting nothing. There are other times, if you're not getting that half a loaf, that you have to keep pushing against the system and working for the next election to get more of your people in, to get, you know, more support. So it's a process of knowing when to unite and when to fight. And I think you need to do each depending upon what the circumstances are. And I feel I'd be very good at doing that with my experience.
What issues do you plan to tackle if you're elected?
A very short-term, immediate one, I feel, is something that just came down yesterday from the Supreme Court, the case of Janus versus AFSCME. And in that case, the Supreme Court ruled that a member of a union, in a public employee union specifically, does not have to pay agency dues to the union, that they consider this a form of freedom of speech. This is like the extension of Citizens United gone even further wild, basically. And I just think that decision is just so off the wall. This is not a matter of free speech. It's a matter of, basically, it's a matter of paying your dues. I want to file legislation that says if you don't pay agency dues to a union, you don't get the benefit of a contract. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And then there's the long-term issues of what we need to do to address in this country. And the big one is health care. And I was listening to Trump last night. He was out in North Dakota, you know, feeding the red meat to his base there, you know, and he was saying, Obamacare is dead, and we got some great policies to replace it, and it's going to be wonderful, and it's going to be great. I don't know what he's talking about. What I see in healthcare right now, we have good healthcare in Massachusetts for the most part, but it takes up 40% of our budget. So I say, let's go for Medicare for all, from womb to tomb. And people who pay a tax into Medicare now, you know, will pay more, and they'll get immediate health care. And the beauty of that is the system's already in place.
Are there any new ideas you plan to bring to Congress if you're elected?
When we come to the issue of these big tax cuts that big corporations got from the Trump tax bill, and my take on this one is, rather than say eliminate them, let's convert them to tax credits. If these businesses want to keep these cuts, then they have to do something to create jobs. If they train people, then they can get a tax credit. If they hire people, a tax credit. If they provide on-site daycare for working people, which would be a major, major help for so many people, I'd give a tax credit for companies that hire people over the age of 40. Because we do have a discrimination by age in this country as well that people don't talk about, but it's there and it affects everybody across the board, and so we need to do something about that. And then a tax credit for making sure that these jobs stay in America, so that there's no issue about jobs that are being created, then being lost and going overseas. The jobs really have to be generated in the private sector. I hear companies say, well, we have jobs available, but we don't have people with the skills to match. And then I hear people say, well, I went and I got some extra, I went to a community college, I got extra courses, I have some skills, but now I got to find a job. So I say, well, for God's sakes, to these companies, here's people, train them for what you need, and then hire them. Let's match the person looking for the job with the job available. It's just common sense. So that's my plan in terms of doing something to create more jobs, and that in turn creates higher wages as well.
What sets you apart from other Democratic candidates?
Most of the candidates do not have elected experience. There are a couple, I think, that do. None close to the amount of years that I've had. In fact, I think I've had more years of elected experience than all the candidates put together.
Is there anything you want the people of Marlborough to know specifically about you going into the primary election?
We need more affordable housing in Marlborough, as well as the other towns. Marlborough does have transportation. Some of the other towns don't. I would like to see that transportation extended, beyond Marlborough into some of the other communities in the region. I think that would do a tremendous benefit for the economy, to be able to get people who work, say, in Boston, to get them to maybe the South Acton train station where they could take the train, the commuter rail into Boston. So I would like to see that happen in Marlborough. I think that would be very helpful for people here. And affordable housing, and certainly more aid for education. I think that's important here, certainly as much as anywhere.
Thank you, Leonard. Now it's time to welcome our next guest, Dan Coe. Dan, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Dan Coe. I'm running for Congress in the 3rd District of Massachusetts, which goes from Haverhill all the way to Gardner down to Marlborough. And my family's from 2 different parts of this world, Korea and Lebanon. They came to Lawrence, Massachusetts. My great-grandfather had a good, well-paying job in the mill, worked his way up. My grandfather, his son, served in the military, then opened up a medical practice in Lawrence that exists to this day with my mom and her 2 brothers. And so my family's lived the American dream. I used to be chief of staff to Mayor Marty Walsh in Boston, and I'm now running for Congress.
Why did you decide to run for Congress?
My family has been very, very fortunate. In 1981, my Korean-American father married my Lebanese-American mother in Andover, Massachusetts, in a time in which interracial marriages were still relatively rare, especially in Andover, but they were welcomed, and they were part of the community, and it was never an issue for anyone. In fact, it was celebrated. And I have a lot of deep loyalty to this district for my family living the American dream here and being welcomed here. We see today, even today, the decision coming down from the Supreme Court, essentially upholding this Muslim racist ban that I believe that it is. If it had been enacted today, my great-grandfather could have never come to this country. And so I take personally the attack on, I think, the very spirit of the United States that's happening in DC, and it motivates me every day to really want to make a difference and preserve that American dream story that so many of us have.
What issues do you plan to tackle if you're elected?
I believe that every single person in this country should have access to good quality care. So I think first we need to fix the ACA to make sure that it remains stable. But I think we eventually need to go to a single payer system. Secondly, I think we need a comprehensive jobs plan for this country, especially in the era of technology. That means making sure that if people lose their job through no fault of their own, that they're able to get training paid for another job. It also means some of the more basic elements of making sure that you have a good job, like a 15 $15 minimum wage, equal pay for equal work, and paid leave. And finally, it means having a comprehensive infrastructure bill in this country so that we're actually addressing those big transit projects that we have, and not just roads and bridges, but also school buildings in our societies and in our municipalities, because there's so much crumbling school infrastructure, and the federal government needs to step in to be able to fill the void that, quite frankly, municipalities can't afford on their own.
Have you come up with any new ideas that you plan to bring to Congress if you're elected?
Yeah, there's so many issues that I think are really, really important. One of them that we did in the city of Boston that I'm very, very proud of is making sure that we are allowing cities and towns to deliver services to their constituents as best as possible, meaning that everything from our potholes that are filled to our graffiti being cleaned up is being measured with goals set to it, and that we are attaching how well we're doing to a lot of those goals. So in Boston, we came up with this system called City Score, the idea being that every single service we delivered would be measured and graded. And so what happened was people performed better as a result. Our pothole fill rates, we were able to track. We were able to cut down on our fire truck response times as a result of tracking ourselves better. And I think a lot of people really respect the idea that technology and data can actually help government do a better job for its people. And so what I would want to do is be able to incentivize cities and towns throughout this district to be able to use technology to better serve people, and quite frankly be more transparent with their data too, so that constituents can see how well we're performing and that the federal government can help them perform even better.
What sets you apart from other Democratic candidates?
First, again, our focus with respect, there's a lot of different issues to talk about, but we're really focused on jobs, healthcare, and standing up to President Trump. Those are our three core issues, and we will talk about that everywhere, because we believe that if you have a good job and you're healthy, you have a good shot at living the American dream, and that this president is fundamentally attacking that dream. I think secondly, as someone with local government experience, we were on the front lines, and I was on the front lines standing up to President Trump, pushing back against his attacks on local government, his attacks on our way of life, and succeeding by making sure that we were standing up for the right values.
What do you want the people of the Metro West to know about you going into the primary election?
I just want to send a very clear message to people in this region that you will not be forgotten if I'm fortunate enough to get elected to Congress. There are so many issues to focus on, but I know that jobs and economic development is so important to this region, and I know that there are so many people in this area who feel like they don't get the attention that they deserve. We are the only office that has we are the only campaign that has an office in this area. We have an office in Hudson right up the road. We're very, very proud of that because we wanted to send a message that we care a lot about this area and that we want to be giving it a ton of attention and listening to people. So again, this is a long race. There are a lot of great candidates in the race, but please do call me at 978-225-7455 and let's have a conversation about the issues that are most important to you, because at the end of the day, if I'm fortunate enough to get to DC, I will never forget who got me there, and I will never be above any kind of conversation, big or small, about how to make this region better.
Thank you for speaking with us, Dan. Now it's time to welcome our next guest, State Senator Barbara L'Italian. Hi, Barbara. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am State Senator Barbara L'Italian, and I am married. I have 4 children, all millennials. I have been served in both the House of Representatives for 8 years. I've served on my Andover School Committee, and this is my 4th year in the State Senate.
Can you describe how you got into politics and what made you decide to run for Congress?
I got involved in political office quite by accident. My oldest child, Rudy, who's now 28 years old, has autism. And when he was first diagnosed, when he was around 5 years old, there were no support systems available for him. I had to help create a school. When my son was shown the door from the public school system because they didn't quite know what to do with him back in the 90s. My oldest son, Rudy, needed a tremendous amount of attention, and I realized that it was very good at working with others, creating things, and trying to make it easier for other children and their families who are struggling with autism.
What issues do you plan to tackle if you're elected?
I've worked on health care coverage over many, many years. I mentioned in particular insurance mandate for kids with autism. And so what I believe now is that the fight is really down in Washington to make sure that people have coverage and that it's coverage that is affordable and that they can be able to access. Environmental justice and making sure that we pay due attention to our, that climate change is real, to believe the science, to allow the scientists to do what they need to do to help us before we reach a point of no return. I think that we need to think about our children's futures, our grandchildren's futures. We've done a lot of this work in the State House in terms of setting aggressive goals for the state of Massachusetts. But at the federal level, we are retreating from acknowledging the Paris Climate Accord. We are retreating from acknowledging that climate change is real. It's really scary. And as you see the polar ice caps melting into the ocean, it's very real. And so we need to be about diversifying our energy sources, and that includes solar, that includes hydro, that includes wind.
What sets you apart from all the other Democratic candidates?
There are 10 people on the Democratic side in this race, and they're all wonderful people. The big difference in my mind is that I have been doing this work as a legislator for 15 years.
What do you want the people of Marlborough to know about you going into the primary election?
I would look to Marlborough elected officials, members of civic organizations, and constituents to let me know what they need me to help them with. I would never presume to come in and work on something that's at cross purposes with the city.
Thank you, Barbara. Now it's time to welcome our next guest, State Rep Juana Matias. Juana, could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, Juana Matias. I'm currently a state representative for the 16th Essex District, which is the city of Lawrence. And a little bit about my background. I came to this country at the age of 5 from the Dominican Republic and saw both of my parents, who were well educated, take on blue-collar factory jobs because they couldn't speak English, and that propelled me to have the opportunity to go on to college and then law school, always returning back to the district where I'm currently running for Congress to be of service.
How do you think your work in Lawrence will help you if you get elected into Congress?
It's been great to be at the State House filing legislation, right? So we're doing the work that you would do federally at the state level. Just if given the opportunity to represent the 3rd Congressional District, I'd be dealing with federal laws. It's been such a great learning experience in terms of working with people who don't see eye to eye on issues that I see. So, the Safe Communities Act has been a very popular bill in Massachusetts. And from the very beginning, when I stepped into the State House, everyone told me, it had advisors and a lot of people like, don't take on that issue. It's really controversial. But I did because, I felt that there was an obligation for me to make sure that I was a voice and champion for working immigrant families across the state. And I've been working with people I'd never imagined. I've been creating bridges, opening doors, bringing people to the table that had never been part of the discussion to try to accomplish something for people who are currently living in fear. So my time at the State House has been absolutely invaluable in helping me prepare for what I'll be doing federally if given the opportunity to be the next Congresswoman for this district.
What are some controversial issues you plan to tackle if you're elected to Congress?
We have one of the most persistent achievement gaps in this country, so there's a lot more that we should be doing. And we know this is the greatest equalizer, the most important vehicle out of poverty, and not just as a state, but as a country, we need to do more to invest in K through 12 education. I find it absurd that in 2018, one of the most industrialized countries in the world is still having a discussion whether access to affordable quality healthcare should be a privilege or a fundamental right. And for me, it's not a dispute. It should be a fundamental right. If you have a need in this country, it should be based on the fact that you have that need, not your economic standing or how much money you have.
What sets you apart from all the other Democratic candidates?
2 things set me apart from the other 10 candidates in this race. 1, I am a product of this district, and I've dedicated my entire career to being of service to this district. As I mentioned earlier in my remarks, after college, I was here working as a social worker with some of our most vulnerable children. After law school, I came back to the district and represented pro bono children who were facing deportation. And so I don't talk about public service. Anyone that takes a minute to look at my track record will see that I've actually dedicated my life to it. I'm a 2-time AmeriCorps, and like I mentioned before, I feel what we need more of in office are working class candidates who understand what it means to be working class and who aren't going to forget who they're there to represent. We're going to put working class families before politics. And then in addition to that, it's the theoretical aspect of, we talk a lot about these issues about college debt. We talk about the difficulties of navigating a healthcare system when someone's sick. We talk about what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, right? And access to a minimum wage. All of these things are things I've lived through. They've made me who I am. and I'm never going to forget, if given the opportunity to represent this district, who I'm there to fight for. And those are the two factors that make me very different than everyone else in this race.
What do you want people in the Metro West to know about you going into the primary election?
I hope to be able to count on your support on September 4th. It's a crowded primary. This is a historic race. I'd become the first Latina ever elected to Congress, not just in Massachusetts, in all of New England. And I hope that in the next couple of weeks, I'm able to earn your trust and confidence and gain your support.
Thank you, Juana. Now it's time to welcome our next guest, Bopa Malone. Hi, Bopa. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Of course. My name is Bopa Malone. I am a proud mother of two amazing children, Tavy, who is 8, and Kaylin, who is 3. And I'm married to Tom Malone, who is such a very supportive husband. And for over 10 years, I've been working at a bank called Enterprise Bank. It's a community bank which is located in the Merrimack Valley, Central Mass, and Southern New Hampshire. I was a vice president there. I'm on a leave of absence, and I'm running for U.S. Congress in the 3rd District.
Why did you decide to run for Congress?
The reason why I'm running is because I want to give everyone the same access to opportunities to thrive and achieve their American dream the way that I did. I came here as a refugee at the age of 9 with nothing but the clothes on my back. My parents experienced the Khmer Rouge regime. They lived through that. Luckily, I was born after. I grew up in the Thai refugee camp. And America opened its door to me in 1989 and offered us a lifeline. And because of caring people, because of great organizations that took us in and helped acclimated us, I've achieved my American dream.
What kind of issues do you plan to tackle if you're elected into Congress?
I would tackle the issue of immigration, and I think I'm the perfect candidate for that. I have a lot of understanding. I lived through it, and I worked in an organization while I was, as I mentioned, while I was working at Enterprise Bank. I chaired an organization called the Cambodian Mutual Assistance Association, which we help Cambodians and other immigrants and refugees to acclimate and integrate.
What sets you apart from all the other Democratic candidates?
I haven't lived the politician's life. I haven't. I'm not from the establishment. I don't come from big money. I've been a part of the community, and my connection and deep root to the community is. I think it's very. I truly believe that it's very strong, and I'm the best candidate to understand everyone. As I mentioned before, you don't have to tell me what it's like to not know the language, to not know how to navigate through the system, to feel scared. I've been there, and you don't know. You don't have to tell me what it's like to struggle and to see your parents struggle. I've been there, but the thing is, I have achieved that, and I truly believe that others can too. But we need to work together. We need to unite and help each other.
What do you want people living in the Metro West to know about you going into the primary election?
Check out my website and learn more about me. My website is bopa4forcongress.com, and if you have any questions or you feel there's anything that I need to listen to or learn from, I would also want them to know to reach out to me, to email me. My number is 781-913-4976. I would love to hear from everyone. This is just a wonderful opportunity to be able to help everyone on a broader level. And when I'm there, I promise you, I will ensure that everyone have the freedom to achieve their American dream the way that I have.
Thank you, Bopa. Now it's time to welcome our final guest, Lori Trahan. Hi, Lori. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
So my name is Lori Trahan. I grew up in Lowell. My dad was a union iron worker, and my mom was a domestic worker. Went to Lowell Public Schools my whole life. We were one of those families that lived paycheck to paycheck. And that's actually at the heart of why I'm running, is to fight for families like the one I grew up in. Good paying jobs, education, affordable health care. Those are the things that a family like mine needs to have more economic opportunity. So For me, it worked out. I got a scholarship to go to Georgetown and went to the School of Foreign Service there. Went to Marty Meehan's office on Capitol Hill after I graduated. Worked for him for nearly a decade, both in Washington and up here in the 5th District back then. And I eventually became his chief of staff. So, I have a lot of experience writing and passing legislation, working on constituent issues.
Why did you decide to run for Congress?
When Congress doesn't work, when there's gridlock, working class families like the one I grew up in get disproportionately harmed. We don't need much, but we do need economic opportunity. We need a good paying job with good benefits, and we need that to outpace, the cost of living. And right now, that's not happening. People can't afford their prescription drugs or their health care premiums. They can't afford to send their kids to school. And so I think there's a big role of government here to, relieve that tension, to shift that balance away from corporate interests and back to working class families. And I see this election in particular as an opportunity to do that.
What other issues do you plan to tackle if you're elected into Congress?
You're reminded all the time that education is the most powerful lever for us closing the income inequality gap, and we have to give everybody access to a great education.
Do you have any new ideas you plan to bring to Congress if you're elected?
I always thought that the country works best and Congress works best when sensible Republicans are working with sensible Democrats to find common ground and get things done. And I think that my business background actually helps me in that regard. I mean, you walk into a boardroom, there's no labels. You just go in and you solve problems, and you try to find where there's consensus and, what things, you may have to negotiate out.
What sets you apart from other Democratic candidates?
We designed our campaign differently. We over the majority of our support is from people who actually live in this district, people who can vote for me, and working class families, small businesses, and that's my way of telling voters and constituents, hopefully, that I'm in this for them, that their voices are the most important voices I bring to Washington, that I am going to fight against corporations, and that there's no better way for me to signal that who I'm accountable to than to do that. And so we're proud of certain things. We've raised more money from inside the district than all 9 of my competitors combined. And it's a hard way to raise money, but we've all been campaigning for 10 months. And so as we've gone to every corner of this district and we've met people, we've been able to build momentum and support. So it's something we're proud of.
What do you want people living in the Metro West and Marlboro to know about you going into the primary election?
I feel honored every day to be part of a field of candidates that are just smart and talented and earnest. And I will say that there's one distinction, I think, above all others that sets me apart from the rest of the field, and that's the experience. Look, there is a lot of issues facing our country, facing this district, that we need to attack with a lot of urgency. And I think hitting the ground running, someone who understands the legislative process, all the tools of Congress, how to get things done with Democrats and with Republicans is really important, especially at this moment. I think what right now folks are craving is a new breed of leadership, people who can go down and are representing their communities because they have deep roots in those communities, and people who are going to reject the fact that we've been catering more to corporate interests rather than working class families. And I hope to be a part of that new shift in leadership.
Thank you so much for watching our political special with all 10 Democratic candidates running for Congress. Rick Green will also appear on the ballot as a Republican candidate. The primary election will take place on September 4th, the day after Labor Day. For WMCT, I'm Talia Clark.